Hello, and welcome to the Cape Coffee Beans podcast. My name is Faden, and I'm the founder of Cape Coffee Beans, South Africa's leading retailer in the specialty coffee space. We sell everything you need to make an amazing cup of coffee at home, at the office, in the cafe, or even on the road, including equipment, accessories, and artisan roasted coffee beans, both online and in store at our headquarters in Claremont, Cape Town. This podcast is a deep dive into the world of South African specialty coffee with a focus on the brands, the businesses, and the people in the local coffee scene, many of whom I'm privileged to work with. I'll be bringing you interviews with many of these South African coffee heroes, so please do subscribe to the podcast and share it with your coffee-loving friends. Thank you for your support. Now let's get to today's episode. Hello, coffee lovers. This episode of the Cape Coffee Beans podcast is another conversation with Joel Singer, who actually was the first guest on the podcast last year. So it was exciting to have Joel back. He's an incredibly knowledgeable and experienced coffee professional, so I always enjoy chatting to him, both on the podcast and off. And today we're talking about a special coffee release from Origin. It is Cup of Excellence Ethiopia award-winning lot number 19, and it's a phenomenal coffee, and we talk quite a bit about that coffee, but perhaps even more importantly for lovers of specialty coffee, this conversation really dives into some detail about what is the Cup of Excellence competition and how do they objectively assess some of the best lots of coffee in the country. So whether you get to taste the specific coffee or not, I think that this offers an opportunity for education from Joel, who's actually participated in the Cup of Excellence competitions himself. And so I think it offers a lot of interest value. If you are listening close to the time of recording, which is February 2021, you may also still have a chance to try this coffee either by buying a bag at Cape Coffee Beans or going and having a cup at one of the Origin cafes. Either way, whether you get to taste this coffee or not, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Here is Joel Singer from Origin Coffee Roasting. Joel, welcome back to the Cape Coffee Beans podcast. You were actually our very first guest, so it's really great to have you back on.
That's cool. Thanks, Faden, for having me again. It's always wonderful to chat.
Well, last time we talked about the history of Origin and where the business has come from and when it's gotten to. And last time we chatted, we were kind of deep in lockdown, and here we are again. But today we are talking about something different. We're talking about quite a special coffee release that you guys have recently brought in. Could you tell us a little bit about what that coffee is?
Yeah, look, a Cup of Excellence, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later on, is a project that now runs in 11 countries and has recently celebrated 20 years of its very good work. And the purpose of Cup of Excellence in brief is to just identify some of the world's most exceptional coffees and to ensure that the coffee market and coffee lovers are able to kind of get a sense of the best of what can be produced anywhere in the world. You know, there are about 400 billion cups of coffee consumed a year, which is just an insane number. And, you know, what's really important is, you know, especially if people are aware of kind of the challenges of the commodity coffee market for producers, to do what Cup of Excellence did, which was to try and, in a very rigorous process, identify truly the best cups of coffee in the world, the best lots of coffee from producers in the world, and to find out what people are willing to pay for those coffees at a roaster level, at a consumer level. You know, that is what gives kind of shows us the sky's the limit in terms of where coffee quality can go and how unique and amazing these coffees can be. So our commitment to bringing Cup of Excellence in, which has been going on since, I think, 2006, very shortly after Origin opened, we've brought many lots in over the years, is just to kind of showcase truly exceptional coffees to South African coffee lovers. And 2020 was the first year in which Ethiopia hosted a Cup of Excellence competition. And we bought a very small quantity, 60 kilos of lot number 19 from Ethiopia.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I've had the opportunity to try it, and it really truly is an excellent coffee. And I think we can circle back a little bit to talk about the coffee specifically. But I think for anybody interested, it's also worth mentioning that obviously this first Ethiopian Cup of Excellence competition happened in the midst of the COVID lockdown. And there's quite an interesting article that I've linked to on the product page and that we'll link to in the show notes about how they managed to pull that off. But you know, stepping back from the COVID stuff and the lockdown stuff, the process that the guys from Alliance for Coffee Excellence and at the Cup of Excellence competitions go through is quite objective, right? And I think that that's one of the reasons that consumers can get really excited about any Cup of Excellence coffee. And I believe people from Origin have participated in these competitions in the past. Can you kind of give a sense of how do they choose these coffees?
Yeah, look, it's an exceptionally rigorous process. I mean, the first thing to understand is that they open the competition to any producer in the country. You can be a co-op, you can be a private or public washing station, you can be an individual producer, and anyone has the opportunity to submit those lots. Those lots are then completely anonymized, meaning that once the lots are submitted, no one knows who the producer was in terms of the juries. There's a kind of a pre-screening that happens with the first jury, which is a local jury. The local jury then tastes the coffees, and the local jury will be kind of local coffee experts. Also, over time, there's been a process by ACE to kind of increase the skill of the local cupping community, along with many other projects that go on in that regard. And the national jury will taste those coffees after the pre-selection. There's 2 rounds of tasting by the national jury. And to get kind of to the next round, each coffee has to score at least 86 points. At that point, an international jury of 20 to 25 of some of the world's top coffee tasters fly in, and anything that passed the 2 national juries then gets to the international jury. They taste those coffees in 2 separate rounds. Again, to get through round 1 of international to round 2, you have to score 86 points or more. Round 2, you've got to score 87 points to be considered a Cup of Excellence coffee, which will then make it to the auction. So they might start with a few hundred samples of coffee submitted or a few hundred lots of coffee. By the time you get to the end, it'll be the top 30 coffees. So if you think Ethiopia is probably the 5th biggest producer of coffee in the world, and certainly one of the greatest of the fine coffee producers in the world with some of the most unique coffees, simply because 95% of the genetic diversity of the Arabica coffee plant sits in Ethiopia. And there are many heirloom varietals there. And, you know, a lot of the coffee grown in other parts of the world is descended from a very limited kind of narrow genetic stock of the original kind of plants that were taken from the region. So you're looking at highly diverse cups, which you don't necessarily see quite that level of diversity in some of the other countries. And you have anyone in the country can submit their best lots, anyone. And that gets narrowed down to the top 30 lots that one of the top juries in the world has decided is worth an 87 or more points. And you got to look at these competitions and everyone's like, oh, 87, is that really a high score? Well, considering in any given Cup of Excellence jury anywhere in the world, for a coffee to even hit 90 or 91 points is extraordinarily rare. So the best lot in this year's competition scored, I think it was a 91.04. And there were only 3 coffees at 90 points plus.
Right.
So you're talking about all 30 lots that made it to the auction, including the lot we bought, you know, being between 87 and 91. There's no 95, there's no 99, you know, so these are unbelievably rare coffees. And other people will talk about specialty grades, and we bought an Ethiopian that's over 85 points. But that jury scoring, you know, the Cup of Excellence International jury scoring between an 87 and a 91 is not the same as somebody else's 87. It's really quite rigorous. So a cup might get tasted 120 times if it makes it into the final top 10. So there's a final round, the 7th round of tasting, which is just about identifying and giving real status and excitement to the top 10 coffees of any jury at one of these competitions. So you're talking about a coffee being tasted 120 times by some exceptional local tasters, as well as some of the top tasters in the world flying in. Any major defect in that coffee, any round where it doesn't place at least 86 or 87 when it gets to the final stage of Cup of Excellence, will not be awarded a Cup of Excellence. You know, we're talking about a product that's the most consumed beverage on earth. It's the 2nd most traded commodity in the world after oil. As we said, there's more than, you know, 1 billion cups a day consumed on earth. A lot of people make this a major part of their lives, including everyone who listens to the Cape Coffee Beans podcast. And so there's this incredibly rigorous process to identify what are exceptionally rare coffees, and then they go through an auction process where there's an open bidding auction with pre-samples available that allow people to decide what they're willing to pay for these coffees and what they think they can sell those coffees to their customers for. So it really is the best coffees in the world sold at an incredible premium price in a live auction competitively throughout the world, which then rewards farmers with kind of the vast majority of the auction price. There's not a lot that's held back. So when farmers sometimes struggle to get fair reward for their effort, Cup of Excellence kind of holds out a light at the end of the tunnel saying, yeah, but there's a spectrum from where you're struggling today. If you can produce these exceptional coffees, the maximum kind of prices you can hope for are the kind of numbers you're seeing in Cup of Excellence. And that's a very large spectrum where most of the coffee sold in the world actually sits more towards the kind of commodity end of pricing. There's some specialty coffees, then you kind of see Cup of Excellence on the horizon at these extraordinary prices for producers. And so Origin wants to support that process. And obviously being an African roaster and an artisan roastery here down in Cape Town, we have been proud supporters of Cup of Excellence for years. I was a judge at Cup of Excellence Rwanda, as was Mike. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, one of our head roasters over the years. And when Ethiopia came up, like it was a no-brainer that we'd be buying one of the lots of Cup of Excellence Ethiopia. And we will for every year that Cup of Excellence Ethiopia is held.
Well, as a consumer, that's a great thing to hear. And I suppose, if nothing else, obviously you described and you gave a nice summary of the rigor that goes into the Cup of Excellence process. But I suppose if you're going to bottom line it for the consumer who's really interested in tasting some of the best coffee in the world, what it boils down to is that Cup of Excellence is a pretty objective way to choose the best lots coming out of one of the 8 to 10 countries in which they run these competitions, right?
Yeah, and it's not Origin saying this coffee is exceptional, or Faden, we both love to say it is. We're talking about a range of some of the best coffee tasters in the world agreeing after tasting 120 cups of it that this is, by no exception, over 87 and one of the best 30 coffees produced in Ethiopia this year, with Ethiopia being one of the great origins and great producers in the world. It's a completely objective opinion. And all of it was cut blind. The protocols are incredibly ruthless. So, it's somebody who's not me or you or some local cafe snob saying this is truly one of the greatest coffees available in the world.
It is, and that's what I love about it. I mean, I've been fortunate over the years to taste some Cup of Excellence lots from a few different countries, including quite a few that you guys have roasted, but a few from our other roasters as well. And that's one of the things that I know is that there's no such thing as a bad Cup of Excellence coffee, right? Like it is such a rigorous process, and it is obviously is the product of having weeded out so many other coffees that you really know that you're going to be getting something quite special if it is a Cup of Excellence coffee. And that's one of the things that I think is quite cool about it. Now, drilling down on Ethiopia specifically, because I think that there are a few things in the fact that this comes from the first Ethiopian Cup of Excellence that are worth talking about. One of them is that obviously historically with Ethiopian coffees, though I know that this has started to change recently, you weren't really able to trace these coffees back to specific farmers, right? So already this is a particularly unique opportunity for Ethiopian coffee drinkers.
Yeah, it is. Look, there was kind of, before I was in Ethiopia the last time, struggling to remember, probably about 4 or 5 years ago. Some years prior to that, there was the beginnings of quite a robust industry of kind of identifying unique coffees from the various regions, and for that farm traceability to kind of trickle through into the specialty market. So for whatever reason, over many years, there had been this kind of buildup of more and more highly selected lots in a more transparent process ending up with roasters. And then kind of there was a process, which I'm not going to go into the detail of, but the Ethiopian government kind of made a different direction with what they called the ECX system, with the idea of trying to get fairer prices for farmers. Obviously, very good objectives behind it. But what happened through that process is there was a high level of dissociation between exporters, roasters, and actual producers, except in the case of certain cooperatives that were still allowed to sell direct. And over that period, it was difficult to achieve traceability. If you found a coffee or a producer you really loved and you tasted a lot 3 years later in the middle of ECX, you'd never be able to get back to that producer because they couldn't sell direct, and you couldn't identify who the producer was in the ECX system. It was purely on cup quality that was created or intermediated by a kind of professional Ethiopian government cupper or parastatal cupper who basically cupped the coffee on your behalf, and then you were auctioning and buying based on cupping notes, or from what an exporter was able to give you once they purchased at the auction. So the system that's worked in other countries like Kenya and so on, where kind of the heart of it is finding those producers, Cup of Excellence being one of the great mechanisms for finding the best producers in the country, finding those producers and starting to kind of reward them and continue to purchase from them as they're able to kind of continue to enhance and maintain quality. That disappeared for a while in Ethiopia, and slowly we're starting to see it come back again. Because I think there was a recognition that they kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater when they were trying to help producers achieve better overall pricing for their coffees. They lost traceability in the mix. And as you say, Cup of Excellence, by needing to be a transparent process back to the producer and being very open as to who the producers of the coffees were at the other end of the auction, that's, again, one of those processes of trying to unlock and recognize those producers and kind of the exceptional coffees that can be produced and exported from country of origin.
Yeah, and this farmer in question, for the benefits of the listeners who maybe haven't read the details yet, his name is Gemeda Elias Dube. I may be mispronouncing that, but his details and his photo are there on the website, and you can link through and read a little bit more about him on the Cup of Excellence website as well. And he actually had 2 placing lots from what I saw, this one and another one, which is quite something.
Yeah, it was lot 24. No.
Yeah, and this was lot 19, and he also had lot 24. I know that this is very much in the realm of speculation, but what would you speculate the impact on a farmer like this would be of having placed in this competition? Do you think that would, have a significant bearing on his, future potential as a coffee farmer?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I mean, I think part of what Cup of Excellence is able to do is to flag some of these producers and give them a podium from which to stand. So if you look back to Brazil Cup of Excellence, which was kind of the first country, and its objective was really to help Brazil build a reputation for producing some exceptional coffees, along with the kind of this huge harvest that they produce, creating about 35% of the world's production. But their exceptional coffees and what they were able to produce at the high end of the quality spectrum was almost lost. And I think any of the farmers that have won in these competitions in the various countries over the years, it has given them a platform from which to claim kind of levels of quality or the potential of their production efforts. And show it to a kind of worldwide audience that then is able to kind of engage with them for not buying just that 20 or 30 bags that they submitted to Cup of Excellence, but looking at their wider production, but knowing what the absolute best that they produce can be worth. And so it allows them through the competition to have a price discovery mechanism that lets them claim a level of worth that the commodity market would typically not reward them with. It often gives them direct relationships with purchasers over the years afterwards. It brings them to the attention of exporters. It brings them to the attention of the top end of the roasting community worldwide. So I think it's a game changer for a lot of these guys. And if you look over the years at various farmers who've kind of built the reputation of their farms, the word Cup of Excellence tends to appear an awful lot in all of their kind of marketing and promotional materials and kind of the things that help them sell their coffee into the market.
Absolutely. And I've seen that, when looking at coffee fact sheets, and I spend a fair bit of time reading coffee fact sheets, is that, if a farm has won a Cup of Excellence competition at some point, even if it was a decade and a half ago, that is still a very significant mark of credibility. So it's nice to think that there's more than just what they'll make on this lot, but also that exposure, which will hopefully carry these farmers forward as well.
No, and I mean, in his word on the website, he says, he's collecting coffee from 100 or more farmers outlying from his own farm, producing some million kilos or 1.5 million kilos of coffee annually from his own production and the neighbors. But he's saying, he produces natural and dry wash coffee, natural dry and wash coffee. His coffee is auctioned through ECX. He says, I understand quality wins, but the market sometimes is not encouraging. And he says, this kind of competition is what quality producers like us can benefit from. I look forward to the auction. So what he's saying is the vast majority of the coffee that he's produced over the years is pushing through kind of a bulk auction system, which is not necessarily rewarding him for making effort to produce the best that he can, both in terms of price and reputation. And the purpose for him of Cup of Excellence is to show the best of what he can do. Yeah. And try and create ways of capturing the maximum value for himself as a farmer by exploiting the maximum potential of his farm.
Yeah, and it's great to see those mechanisms at work. Now, you mentioned that this farmer seems to be producing natural lots, and I haven't been in the coffee industry anywhere near as long as you have, but when I started, we didn't get a lot of natural Ethiopians, right? I feel like many of the Yirgachefs and Bujis and things like that we were drinking were always washed lots. Were you surprised that one of these top lots was a natural? I suppose we're seeing more and more high quality natural lots coming out of Ethiopia now.
Yeah, look, I suppose the joy is that as soon as you get to Cup of Excellence, I mean, I'm just glancing through the recent auction. Yes, there are a lot of naturals on there. There's a few of the more modern mechanisms in terms of anaerobic fermentation, but there's still a lot of washed coffees in there. But when I think back to the first national barista competition that was run here in 2006, 2007, when Willem won, there wasn't enough coffee for all the competitors. So what we did was the guys from the East African Fine Coffee Association sent a bunch of bags of coffee down, and together with John Saunders, who was the head technical judge, Willem and I roasted some of that coffee, which the competitors were then free to use. And I remember that lot as one of the best coffees I've ever had. I've even met the lady who exported that lot in 2006 in Ethiopia. And it was a natural processed Yirgacheffe that tasted like caramelized baked apricots. I mean, it was like one of the most extraordinary coffees I'd ever tasted. But you got to remember, I mean, as you know, that to get extraordinary natural coffee takes an awful lot of effort. It takes a lot of infrastructure to dry it. It takes a lot of effort to make sure that kind of there's fermentation taints, that as the coffee dries as whole cherry, if your conditions aren't perfect and you're not immaculate in how you work with those coffees, the results can sometimes be a bit disappointing. So natural coffees are harder to get right, but when they're right, they are often truly, truly unique and exceptional. So I'm always looking for the interesting naturals, but I think there's always been naturals coming out of Ethiopia. I just think that the quality of what's available is probably improving. And by the time you get to Cup of Excellence, you're talking about the impeccable naturals that are sitting on the table, right? So, is this a broad measure of how much super high quality naturals are coming out of Ethiopia and whether that's improving? I don't think Cup of Excellence tells us that, because you're only tasting the rarest of the rare. Yeah. That doesn't mean that the rest of the naturals follow, if that makes any sense.
That does make sense. Yeah. One of the other things that stood out to me about this coffee is that it's also a single varietal coffee. A lot of even the high quality Ethiopian lots that we taste are kind of in the broad bucket of heirloom, but this one is a single variety called Kurme. Do you think that that's something we're going to see more of coming out of Ethiopia in the future?
Look, I think selectivity in most producing markets has become more and more important, because you have opportunity to kind of expose kind of unique varietals and characteristics. And there's obviously a lot more in Ethiopia. I think some of those heirloom varietals in Ethiopia, the lots that we get, are mixed heirlooms simply because, in Ethiopia, you're buying from 95% small producers. There's a obviously long tradition of growing coffee in Ethiopia, and what they grow is what they grow. So regionally, they may have certain varieties, but any given farm or group of farmers, each farm is producing very small quantities, and then those quantities are bulked up together based on kind of regional and that sort of thing. And you're going to see inevitably a lot of mixed varieties in those lots. Often regionally, it's just what we grow here. I mean, I think back to an olive farmer I knew from Crete, whose trees were 2,000 years old or something in this village. And I said, I'm really interested in planting olives here in Cape Town. Like, this is the best olive oil I've ever tasted. What kind of olives are these? And he just looked at me and goes, olives. It's like, these are the olives we grow in my village, and we've been growing them for 2,000 years, and yes, they're delicious, but they don't have a name. They're just the olives that we grow. Yeah. And Ethiopia does have a little bit of that going on, but I do think, as the market looks for more specificity and wants to be able to identify things, I think people will tend to specialize in certain things. So we should see a little bit more of that, definitely.
Well, last but possibly not least, Joel, I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about the actual profile of this coffee in the cup, and I'd also be interested to hear if you think that any of those flavor notes are attributable to some of these unique characteristics of the coffee, and what variety it is, the fact that it was naturally processed. Because while I would say that to my palate, there was something distinctly Ethiopian about it, it also is quite different from a lot of the other Ethiopian coffees that I've tasted.
Yeah, look, the lovely thing about Ethiopian coffees, look, is, as I said, the diversity of flavors that you can experience from the different regions, partly because of the genetic diversity that you've got there. And the naturals tend to reveal some quite, when they get them right, some quite extraordinary fruit flavors. And we were all tasting it. Yes, you can kind of taste grape in a lot of coffees. Yes, you can taste plum in a lot of coffees. Yes, you can taste chocolate in a lot of coffees. But it's the combination of things that you see in this coffee that's quite unique. And that's when you get to these rarefied things. Can I tell you it's endemic to Kurume? Well, I've never tasted a Kurume coffee before, and I certainly haven't tasted 10 of them side by side to see if there's any commonality. The fruit notes are definitely accentuated by the natural processing. And then you're talking about ideal growing conditions, ideal picking, extraordinary kind of attention to detail in the processing of a lot that he would want to submit to Cup of Excellence, or any producer would. And you start to see, like, I've never tasted lychee in a coffee before. And it's that very floral lychee that for me is quite unique to kind of South African lychees, which I haven't tasted in lychees when I eat them in Canada or when I've eaten them in the Far East. It's very, very floral taste. Now, I've never tasted that in a coffee. And often we taste kind of wine grape, white grape, sometimes in the acidity, sometimes in kind of the tannic nature, the grip of the coffee. But like, this tasted like Fanta grape. It tasted like Ferrero Rocher. The sweetness was incredibly deep. It's a very refined coffee and a very elegant coffee. But as you might have mentioned, like, Ethiopian coffees tend to be unique, and it's still a big and rich and deep and complex coffee, but yet among an Ethiopian kind of universe, this coffee is incredibly refined, incredibly elegant, velvety, and has this just endless lingering finish on it. So you can taste a lot more complexity in the cup in a coffee like this than you would from a kind of run-of-the-mill, even extraordinary Ethiopian from the same region.
And I would second all of that. And I would also say, because my routine with new coffees, because I am fortunate to be able to taste many of them, is that I'll take a bag and brew it in 6 or 7 different brew methods. And this one really did surprise me in terms of just how different that profile was every way that I tried it, but really revealing some lovely flavor note.
I was going to say they're highly distinctive. Sometimes, someone will say, "Oh, I tasted rose petals in this coffee." And if you're cupping coffees all the time and you're tasting a lot of different coffee from different regions, you will pick up those unique flavors. But in a coffee like this, and you often get this with Ethiopian coffees, like, the notes are clear and they're loud. They're not hidden, and you need to dig for them as a highly experienced cupper to try and find them. They're pronounced,
absolutely,
and forward.
Yeah, absolutely, and I really think that they're well worth experiencing. So for anyone who is interested in trying the coffee and is listening close to the recording time, I know that you managed to bring in a little bit more of it, so it will be on sale on the Cape Coffee Beans website for at least a couple more weeks, hopefully. But if for people who want to try it brewed by the talented baristas at Origin, I believe you guys will be serving it at the cafe at times as well. Is that right?
Yeah, it's pretty much continuously available until we've sold it all. And we pour it as espresso, kind of classic things. I know it sounds like a bit like kind of a heresy to say that you can drink it with milk, but you can have it as a flat white or a cortado if you want. But the most exciting kind of expression of the coffee is either in an espresso or through one of the alternative brew methods, very particularly in our universe, kind of the pour over and Chemex methods, although it's also great in an AeroPress and some of the other methods too. And we do the Cup of Excellence in all of those brew methods.
Fantastic. Well, and I definitely personally would encourage anybody to try at least the pour over in the espresso. The pour over is something you can probably pull off at home pretty well as well, but I went and had my espresso made by the guys at Origin who know what they're doing, and it really, really did make a phenomenal espresso, and I'd encourage anyone who can get there to try it. So, Joel, thank you so much for sharing your time and some of your knowledge about this coffee and the background and the Cup of Excellence. And perhaps even more importantly, thank you for bringing this coffee in to share it with everybody in South Africa.
Thanks so much. We hope everyone gets a chance to taste it.
That concludes this episode of the Cape Coffee Beans podcast. If you do still have the chance, I'd really encourage you to try this coffee. I have to say that even though it is obviously inexpensive coffee, we were retailing it at 300 Rand a bag. If you consider the fact that this is objectively measured as one of the best coffees to come out of Ethiopia last year, which is one of the great coffee producing countries in the world, I actually think that you'll find that it is pretty good value for money, and it really is quite a flavor experience. So I'd encourage you to buy a bag. The link will be in the show notes. And you also, if you are in Cape Town, definitely should pop over to the Origin Cafe to try it out. In the meantime, thank you for listening. Please do leave a review for the podcast if you have a chance. And as always, I would encourage you to give us feedback on the episodes. You can email podcast@capecoffeebeans.co.za. Thank you for listening, and happy brewing.